I'm delighted to have Kezia Dugdale here on the podcast with me tonight, because you can probably tell it's quite dark and all the lights are on. Kezia's live from Edinburgh, and I'm in sunny Glasgow, or dark and gloomy Glasgow. I'm I've met Kezia at the John Smith Foundation a couple of months ago, and I was moved by how warm and genuine she is, and I thought the work that she does with the John Smith Foundation is so important. let's let's have a chat with her about it. It has a real, I suppose, as that theory can be transplanted into the business community to understand a bit about the work that she's doing. But before I welcome her on, I have to welcome her on just on the tail end of Mr. Hancock being on I'm a Celebrity. So tell me, Kezia, he's not the first politician that's ever went into that jungle. Is that true?
No, he's not, but he's done a lot better than all the other previous politicians. So, by my count, I think he's the fourth. So, I can't remember in what order who came first, but Lembit Otpick, who used to be a Liberal Democrat MP, he did the jungle maybe over 10 years ago now, because it's been going for a long time. And then Nadine Dorries, that'll be a lot more familiar to people these days because she's recently been the Culture Secretary in the UK government. But before she had a government role, she was quite famous for writing lots of fairly raunchy fiction novels, as well as being a Conservative MP. So
Right,
she
yeah.
did it. And then me, I was definitely the third one in, and then Matt Hancock this year. And each and every one of us has faced a lot of controversy for doing it. There's no doubt about that. But also, I think each and every one of us would argue it was worth doing and something they didn't regret because it gets the public, a huge number of the public, because it's one of the most watched programmes in the whole country in the history of telly, to see politicians in all their glory, warts and all. So yeah, and it gives people a laugh, right? At the end of the day, we all could do with a little bit more of laughter in our lives.
Well, I think that you're right, and that's a key philosophy in my life. Because if you can't laugh, what else have you got? So yeah, well done for being so honest about it. Well, so we met at the John Smith Foundation, Kezia. I've watched you for years. Growing up quite politically animated about what was happening in Scotland, what's happening across the UK, and I think now's a time when many people I speak to in the business community generally are far more politically frustrated or involved, or just I don't know how to describe it, but it's just this business politics. What's going on? What's happening here? Is there a disengagement? And then you look at the political outlook, and it just seems quite dark out there. And having met you, having talked to you, and we'll talk about the John Smith Foundation shortly, but you have a lot of insight you know into what's going on and what's happening, or hopefully you do. What's your thoughts? I mean, first of all, if I broadly ask you, business and politics, where is that connection? Is it disjointed now, or am I out of line for saying that?
No, but I think, like everything else in our politics, it's affected by how tribal and binary our political culture has become, right? And this isn't just something that's happening in the UK, it's something the world over. It's a product of global populism. And that might all sound really theoretical, but what I really mean in practice is things like social media, the way that we do politics in different countries around the world, is forcing people into tribes. And when we're in our tribes, we increasingly listen to more people that agree with us, and we become less tolerant of the people that disagree with us. And social media makes that even worse. So, what that really means is if you don't spend time understanding your opponent's view or people who hold a different worldview from you can't make decent, informed decisions, and you certainly can't take decisions that are in the interests of the vast majority rather than your particular group in society. And I think that's what's happening between politics and business just now. So you've got this polarisation of politics where only the Conservatives are viewed as pro-business and Labour are somehow seen as anti-business because they believe in the power of the state and they want to use the power of the state to kind of drive social change. That's a really blunt, outdated description of the reality of what needs to happen. I think every party in politics is pro-business, right? Because everybody, with the exception maybe of the Greens, who would argue that climate change and economic growth are they clash or they're counterproductive. But for most political parties, they want to grow the economy because they want the tax receipts from that to invest in public services. So it's in everybody's interest for businesses to grow, to prosper, and to pay their fair share, yes, but to be as successful as they possibly can. And a lot of that really comes down to trust as well. So we've always distrusted our politicians. And that's quite a healthy thing, actually. If you think about the countries that trust their politicians, they tend to be authoritarian regimes or dictatorships. But you don't want trust to be as low as it is right now. I mean, it's perilously low and it's getting worse. Because if it hits a rock bottom, people won't follow the advice and the guidance, they won't follow the policies and all that that come from our leaders. So we need to rehabilitate politics, and everyone will benefit from that, including business.
It's a really interesting way of putting it, Kezia, because I think about um, through COVID and the pandemic and taking business from talking to people personally about the rules that were there at the start, and everybody fell into line. And as time went on with those COVID rules, about the numbers that you could have in your garden and all, so many people just said, you know what, they get so tired of the rules. So it's kind of like from a business perspective, that's kind of what you're kind of intimating. Then it's just they've lost that little bit that makes it join up together.
Totally. I think that's really apparent by if you remember back to those dark days of the pandemic, whenever the Prime Minister had to stand up and tell us what we couldn't do that week, they were
Yeah.
always flanked by the chief scientist and the chief medical officer. And that's because the public were far more likely to follow what those people had to say about what was in our best interest than what politicians had to say. Now, we got through that scenario, because we had those medical experts and all the rest of it. But what happens now is we try to recover from the economic pandemic. There's a lot of businesses who are only just over what's happened in the pandemic, starting to rebuild and starting to be in crisis again over the energy bills that they're faced with, or they're worried about the rising cost of staffing their offices or businesses. And that's before you get to inflation, and that's before you get to the difficulties that companies have with kind of trade links and how the cost of doing business at the minute. All of those problems I've mentioned are political choices, or at least are related to the political process. So business can't turn its back away from the political process. It has to engage. But at the same time, it's got every right to expect politicians to be engaging with business and listening really hard to what they need to survive. And the fact that we're just talking about survival is pretty shocking, isn't it? Like, we should be talking about business thriving, not just getting through winter, but really like getting back to the stage where we lead Europe and lead the world in some of the great innovations we've got in this country.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's really interesting you say that, because I look at when we're talking to businesses across Scotland, particularly in the manufacturing sector, it's very bleak, very bleak. They're looking at what the outlook is, the energy crisis, so many unknowns, and this, word perma crisis that's used over and over again. This, it's, I get the feeling that people are in there kind of going, oh, I just can't do this anymore, and we're seeing the difficulty that they have in recruitment and retention, and the areas of skilled migration as well, the difficulties in actually getting that in place. Looking at the demographics of Scotland declining as well, an aging population is declining. So concerns and worries for the future, not just next year, not just 2 years, 5 years, 10 years time, will the businesses survive? So it's really interesting the way of putting it. Would you look at, excuse me, would you look at if I ask you then, before I get, we go into the main topics that we're going to talk about, is that, actually, I think we've started on the main topics, Kezia, so I don't think I think I'm going off on one here, but when you look at the role of business and you look at the role of politics, you talked about that, and I think about one of the main things that sometimes people forget. Yeah, I work in business and I work in the recruitment sector. It doesn't have a great reputation, but we do the right thing. We talk about giving back to the community around us and being that really, really important. And this is probably quite a loaded question, but I have this belief that it's not just, you talked about the vision of the Conservative Party and the Labour Party and, state and the voice of business, and it's not like that. And business has a duty to give back, but I think it has to come from the core of the company. It's not just a tick box exercise, and to believe what's right in society. And you can be profitable, and it's not a bad word, and you can grow, you can empower people. And I think there's a perception, potentially, maybe historically or not, I'm not sure, but that maybe business hasn't painted itself in a great light. Many big businesses out there are multinational organizations, multinational businesses. They don't have great working practices, and everybody gets dragged down with them when it comes to workers' rights and all those types of things. And I've maybe just gone off. I'm sorry, I've got carried away with myself here, Kezia, but I think there's
I've not stopped you because everything you've said's right. So keep going.
no, I won't stop you because I'm going to be talking to you. But I think is that at the core of what we do anyways about doing the right thing, it probably leads quite nicely onto the next point, is that um, doing the right thing can be many, many different things. It doesn't mean writing a blank check to a charity and support. Of course, that's a great thing to do, but that's not just what it's all about. It's being at the core of the business and saying, well, people in the community need help, they need support, they need development, they need opportunities created for them that maybe wouldn't be there where there were barriers, which ties me into where we first met through the John Smith Centre. And I'd probably like to then lead on to ask you about what I remember John Smith. I remember man himself, never met him, watched him. I remember my father, treated him like he was a hero when we watched him in the news and watched him in politics at Westminster. What is the what is the John Smith Centre before we move on to those other areas?
So we exist to make the positive case for politics and public service, right? Because we think politics, it's the best thing we've got, right? It's the best system we have.
Yeah.
Representative democracy is the least worst of all the options we could have. So we should defend it and try and make the very best of it. That's a difficult argument at the minute for all the reasons that we've kind of skirted around already just now. So what we try and do is defend it, make the positive case for politics. And we do it really through three different types of activity. We research, so we provide the evidence base for what the public think about their politicians. We advocate, so we say this is a force for good and look at these brilliant people doing brilliant things in public life and look what they've been able to achieve, and try and ensure that young people keep their minds open to vocations in public life. And I'm not just talking about, becoming politicians themselves, but maybe working behind the scenes in politics, working in the civil service, working in the charity sector, or in that whole kind of civic bubble that supports our democratic life. And then the third part of what we do, which is the thing I get most excited about, is the really practical internship and development programs that we run. So we heavily target groups of mostly young people, but not exclusively young people, across the country who are underrepresented in public life. Now, that might be women, that might be people from working class communities, that might be people who have experience of being in the care system, or it might be minority ethnic communities, which are repeatedly underrepresented in every walk of Scottish life, from business to councils to the Scottish Parliament. And for me, one area that really stood out in my 15 years working in around, God, I think it might be 20 now, in my 20 years, in my 20 years working in politics and public affairs in Scotland, great credit to the amazing people I've met and the amazing things that they've achieved. But if there's one common factor in the 20 years I've seen in my working life so far, Shan, in Scotland, middle class and white. Now, if you have a staff complement in any organisation that's almost exclusively white and middle class and sometimes male as well, you're really limited in the creativity and the innovation that flows from that, because you've got a critical mass there of people with the same life experience broadly. And people with the same life experience will more than often come to the same conclusion. Doesn't mean it's the right one. So my argument for like having more equality, diversity and inclusion in the workplace is not just it's the right thing to do because it suits my fluffy values of inclusion. It's really smart business to have better informed decisions, to have lots of viewpoints in the room, to hear everything, to have that kind of variety of experience, lived experience of life, and then come to a conclusion about what decision you need to take or what strategy you're going to implement next, or what direction you want to take your business in. Diversity and inclusion is just good business from my perspective.
There's academic research to show that the more diverse your organization is, that the flow of ideas, it's different lived experience that comes in and actually equates to profitability and efficiency, which is the bit that I didn't realize until we do a bit of reading on it. So actually the promotion of a more diverse and inclusive workplace can actually benefit the business
100%,
in its
no doubt about
entirety.
it. Yeah. It's common sense. Just it's such common sense. It makes you wonder why it hasn't happened already. Because if it was
Yeah.
any other business decision, or if a report about anything else came out and said your business can become more efficient, you can drive up productivity and save X amount of money by doing this, you would do it, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
why wouldn't you make your business more inclusive?
It just shows that there is a benefit, a huge benefit for it. So it's not a tick box exercise. It's not something to to beat a quota or statistics. This is about actually genuinely making a better place to work or a better background to where you are and how things work. So Tell me a little bit about then. So that you've got the three parts to the John Smith Foundation, and you said that the final part was the bit that gets you really excited, right? So why is that? What is it that's driving you then personally, Kezia, to get you so invigorated about it?
If I say to you, I want to defend politics as a vocation and I'll do this research and I'll have this event over here with this amazing person, that's all well and good, but I can't point to any meaningful, lasting change that comes of that, right? Whereas the internship and development programs that we run, and we've got at least 5 different programs, all targeted at different underrepresented groups at the minute, all of different lengths and different intensities, all really successful. I would say that, wouldn't I? But they're all really successful. They've got great outcomes. I can introduce you to real human beings who will tell you this program made a difference in their lives or improved their employability or it gave them the confidence or a skill or whatever to be the thing that they wanted to be. So I love it because you can see lives changing literally week in, week out. And you did me the great service of agreeing to be a mentor for one of our programs. So it's not just like, it's a serious investment we put into these young people. The program that you helped us with is a 9 months placement, 15 hours a week with a charity or non-governmental organisation in Scotland just for minority ethnic Scots or emerging leaders as we prefer to call them. So we recruited 50 of them. They did their placements. They had all sorts of additional networking opportunities and training to undertake, but they also all got a mentor. They all got a person of colour that they were introduced to who wasn't in the same company as them or the same organisation as them, who could just be a friend and an ally and a sort of regular source of support and inspiration so they could see that people like them could be super successful and be anything that they wanted to be. So you very generously gave up your time to be a mentor on that program. And then I, along with my colleague Nosheen, forced you to come to the kind of closing conference event of our program so you could see some of the wrap-up work we were doing with them. And I like to think you were quite impressed by what you saw, not what the John Smith Centre put on, but like what you saw in those 45, 50 young people and the stories they had to tell about their experiences.
I actually think, Kezia, that was the kind of seeing it and feeling it, living, and it was mentoring through COVID times, wasn't it? And then that was a face to face, the big face to face event, and I was blown away. And not dismissing, the work you were doing, but the when you heard them speaking or interacting with them, the passion that they had, and the real belief that they had in themselves, which I don't think for 1 minute didn't come from the work that the John Smith Foundation had done. It was just so warm to hear. And I'm going to actually say this quite brutally, that when I looked at it and I reflected back, I was honoured, genuinely honoured to be involved in support. But I actually think back to when I was younger, and I think back to 25 odd years ago, or whenever it was, that if there was a program like that for me, it would have been, I would have just thrown myself into it. I would have been cautious and concerned and worried, and then would have seen it and got involved in it. It would have been so beneficial. And I just think that opportunity that you've created will change the paths of those people's lives.
I really hope so. And certainly I can see early, really significant signs that it's working because a large number of the young people that went through the first year of that programme are now in the type of employment they wanted to be in. Quite a few of them ended up going to work for their host organisation because they'd made such an impact. I can point to at least 6 of them that are now employed by the people they did their placements with, which was never part of the original deal. It wasn't like an apprenticeship where you get to stay if you do a really good job. This was an added extra, a real bonus. It shows that it's working. But if I just take a wee step back and say something about why I think it works, Shan, and why I wouldn't want people to kind of misunderstand or misrepresent what we've done here. The John Smith Centre is, we are acutely aware, still a really white organisation. Um, we had one person of colour on our staff team and we had one person of colour on our board. So we were acutely aware that we had to be very careful about how we designed this programme because it might not be what people wanted. What would we know about the delivery of that programme? But every single element of this programme was co-produced. So we brought in real experts from an organisation called The Collective, who've got real experience around EDI issues, to talk to us about what a properly inclusive co-produced programme would look like. So we did a lot of work working out what young Black or Asian Scots actually wanted? What did they think they needed? What would they like to do? What did they think the barriers they were faced with are? What did they need to overcome that? What did those organisations need to do in order to allow them to overcome it? Like, where's the responsibility for change and all that? Where does it lie? So we did an awful lot of planning, and we tested every single element of the programme design with a small sounding board of real experts, people of colour who have worked their whole lives on these issues. So we could really go to the Scottish Government and say, this is a proper programme that's been tested to within an inch of its life, and we believe it'll work. So I just think that's worth mentioning, because if you're going to do this type of intensive